Can you put Lovecraft in a steampunk setting? That's what I'm going to do. Welcome back to another Terranscapes video. I am super glad, I'm always glad, but today I'm super glad that you are joining me because this is the inaugural video for the new project that I am beginning. It has been an interesting process starting a new project of my entire construction and thinking about what I might like to do. I thought that something steampunk might be kind of interesting. I've never done anything in that genre before. I think it's quite popular, so I have a feeling that many of you might enjoy it. And when I was thinking about that, I wanted to have some kind of structure or narrative for it, and I decided that I would use my many, many years of being a fond Lovecraft fan to bring some of HP's literary influence into this piece. So I'll be creating a diorama, and in my mind's eye, it's going to be a member of a triptych, which is 3 pieces, traditionally paintings, that come together. We'll see how that goes after I finish the first one. Right away, it's been a little challenging for me to think about how to work with something so small, but put all of the narrative into it that I want to put into it. What I decided to do was, once I got this sort of steampunk motif in my mind, and knowing that I don't want to hand sculpt a dozen miniatures, I went out to go see what kinds of steampunk miniatures are out on the market, and I believe I found just about every single one of them. Probably not, but I've saw many, 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 and I've thought I had seen them all, and then I found another couple sites, and I was like, oh! So I'm going to put a couple pictures here that show some of the miniatures that I have selected, and it was the walker, this sort of weird walker, that gave me the inspiration for the narrative for this piece. So I'm envisioning this as a walking tour of Innsmouth. If you are not familiar with the Shadows Over Innsmouth, the Shadow Over Innsmouth story by H.P. Lovecraft, I will put a link in the description down below. I found a very, very nicely read audio book, short story, that I've thought was delivered brilliantly. So if you're interested in listening to that story, you can go see that link down below. With that walker, I got the idea that I will make these tourists in this walker doing a walking tour of Innsmouth. And I have to do some modifications to the Innsmouth sort of lore, if you will, because in the story, it's well known to be a bit off, and it's hard for me to envision tourists wanting to go to town like that. So I'm going to play a little bit with it in the sense that it's sort of not well known that it has very interesting residents. And I think Lovecraft will be okay with that because he was more than fine to have people borrow from his work and modify it to suit their own. Robert E. Howard did quite a bit of this, borrowing from the Necronomicon motif, and he was a contemporary of Lovecraft, and he had issues between each other, but none of them revolved around using some of Lovecraft's world building in Robert E. Howard's work. So hopefully, actually, I don't have to hope. I know he's okay with it. So that's what I'm working with. So with that very loose idea, I sat down and I started doing some planning, and that is what I am going to show you today. And I want to frame it, if you will, in the sense that while this may sometimes be perceived as me just saying, here's what I did, I want to try to emphasize some of the thoughts I had about what makes a good diorama work and where I wasn't thinking that when I started, but to use it as a guide if you're interested in doing some kind of a similar project. You know, I think I've listed out some of the key attributes that make focal points that should be considered when constructing a good diorama. Of course, I keep calling it a good one. I haven't even made it yet, but it's going to be, I think, better than the previous ones I've done. So hopefully you find this helpful. But before we do that, it's cocktail time. So today's cocktail is an opening. I took my book, I cut it open, I said, I need a cocktail. Oh, rye whiskey? Okay. I have these ingredients. Okay. Little unusual for me. In that it's on the sweet side. So it's 2 ounces of rye, 1 ounce of grenadine, and 1 ounce of sweet vermouth with a cherry. Shake it, strain it over ice. First of all, it's nice color. I think it's, this is kind of a nice party cocktail. And I think for those of you who may not be hardcore cocktail drinkers, if you wanted something that's a little sweet, something that you can walk around with, it's not cloying. Let me hold on. Almost cloying. If you don't like sweet cocktails, you won't like this. Anyway, it's an opening. It's an opening to a new project. I didn't even plan that. So this is my initial sketch for the diorama. Tons of things wrong with it, so don't really pay attention to it, except that it gives me a starting point to explain what I was envisioning. So what I had envisioned is a walker, this strange sort of mechanical tour boat, if you will, like a land boat, carrying tourists from maybe a nearby city who've come down to New England, whatever, to view a quaint fishing town. And in this scene, the walker is approaching walking along the harbor, and then notices, oh, what are these guys doing? And these are a couple scientists, and they got a little aquarium with a strange fish in it, and the divers are bringing up strange organisms from underneath the water. That's the kind of thread that is guiding me in this thinking. Thinking about tying it in with a little Lovecraft, then I thought, okay, so if I'm going to make this Innsmouth, right, then we can have some deep ones, which are like fish people, if you're not familiar with the story. We'll talk about that at the end. I thought it'd be nice to have maybe one approaching the walker, hidden as a threat element. As I was thinking initially, you need some kind of action, something that conveys a narrative. And then I thought, well, what if you had like a little sewer opening that was underneath the town and the city, and then maybe an old deep one could be coming out of that or something like that. So that's where I started, thinking cobblestone street, stone wall. This is like a stone jetty or something, right? All sorts of problems here. And I had to really go back and think about this in a very, very different way. And just to show you how I got stuck on this idea for a while. So, man, I could not get this thing into perspective. Even a simple, 45 degree, I don't know. There's a reason why, and maybe I'll mention it later. But I thought, well, I'll crop this because I got all that extra space over there that isn't being used. Bring this up. I feel like I still needed to have water in front of this to convey a sense that this is a jetty, right? And when I looked at this, I'm like, this looks like an aquarium. This is an aquarium. And something is desperately wrong with this. And I realized that it is the way I have laid this out. These are all horizontal lines. It's created a box. Nothing looks dynamic in a box. You also need some dynamicism. I don't know if that's right. I think so. So I set that aside. I started on something else. And then I said, I'm totally screwed up. Where am I going with this? And I realized I needed to have some angles. So I put this little thing together. Actually, this is like the fourth one on this page. I was kind of throwing some sketches down, and I was like, wait a minute. I need to go back before I plan and think about what makes a diorama a good diorama. What I did is I stepped back and I thought, I'm just gonna work on what it is that I need to consider for this. This was the list I came up with. The first is, and I think these are true for any diorama, and so that's kind of why I was like, I want to show you where I was and what I think is important that I was lacking. If you're interested in dioramas, these are kinds of things you might want to consider. If you do really high quality dioramas and I'm missing something, then let me know. But in any case, I'll just go over these pretty quickly here. One is it needs to have a sense of place. It needs to feel like it's part of a much bigger scene that we've only got a little snapshot of. So that's an important feel. I think that the movement, at least in this instance of the walker, needs to be somewhat towards the viewer, because the scene is kind of approaching the viewer, right? We're coming in together on this focal point. I need to eliminate dead space, which my previous drawings had plenty of. I want the viewer to have a clear view of the action, and you can see here the way I was trying to like play with, okay, so if it's like this, you know, and I had some other angles put in, and I'm like, but you can't view it from this side because the action is hidden, and you can't really view it from this side because it's all far way back, and it, you know, I was like, all right, so we need to make sure all of us need to have a clear view of the action. I need to balance it visually, and that's in reference to weights, visual weight, so, you know, heights and mass, and make sure that there's a feeling of balance within the piece. And then I started thinking about how I need to compress this. I need to bring a lot of action into a very small spot, because a diorama, by its nature, really requires a fairly small footprint. So I need to bring in the scientists and the walker and the divers in tight, but not make it feel crowded. And I think it'd be nice to have the walker literally looking over the scene. And when I thought about this, I was thinking that the tourist's view in the walker looking on is very parallel to our view, right? What's our viewing angle? What's the tourist viewing angle? Because as they peer over, so do we. They're looking down onto something, and your eye wants to, I want your eye to come in like, what are they looking at? And then come in close to see what that is. So their eyes will draw the viewer's eyes. I think that's an important element. I wanted to ensure that the viewer wants to view it from the front, whatever the front is. I don't want them to be tempted to look at the sides. You can look at the sides, and I'll finish it, you know, in ways that make sure that there's something there. But that takes away from the scene. This should be directive. It should drive where the viewer looks, because that's the only way you'll convey that scene in the most strongest manner. So I want to drive people to look at it from the front. I need to vary my angles. See previous drawings for the major problems on that. Every element needs to have a clear sense of purpose. It needs to be relevant to the scene. And that's important in movie making and in a variety of forms of art. And that's something I need to keep in mind of. I wanted the viewer to be privileged when they look at it. So even though this is all screwed up, we'll go back to it for a second. So I want, you know, the tourists are going to be looking down, right? They're looking down onto this. They see this. They see the diver, but they don't see the diver underwater. And in this case, nobody sees this. So this diver doesn't see these. These are hidden elements from everybody in the scene. And that's privileged content for just the viewer of the diorama. So I think that's important because it creates I don't know how to describe it, but I know it's important. It's when you feel like you're seeing a secret, that's titillating, right? This is why secrets are so exciting to have people tell you, because you know something nobody else does. It's very exciting. I think that's something that should be incorporated. And then I started to think about, well, maybe I should think a little bit more about the story of the piece itself. And so I wanted the tour guide to notice something, and then I guess I'm trying to keep this over here, right? Here the tour guide hasn't noticed anything. He's just walking by. I want him to pull the walker over. Whoa, this is something exciting. These tourists probably want to see that, and he brings it over to the scientists. The excited tourists are looking over to get a better look, and below there's scientists examining things, strange creatures, discovered maybe in maintenance of the pier or the wall underneath, and a little aquarium that they're storing them in to take back to the lab. A diver, of course, where the process is ongoing. The diver is collecting new specimens. And deep ones somewhere in this are hidden from the viewer. I don't know if I mentioned it, but the deep ones are this residents of Innsmouth that basically turn into more fish than man. And that's where I'm making the tie-in to Lovecraft. There's problems with that, though. We'll continue. I wanted the collection to feel delicate, like, ooh, these are fragile animals. How he's catching them, though, I gotta work on that. And then possibly having some kind of a threat. Is that the deep ones maybe threatening the walker and nobody sees that? So it was something, again, here I'm in the privileged viewer, something that you notice that nobody else does. And then I stopped and I stepped back and I said, wait a minute, what is this scene now? Where are we? What is this object? Is it a stone jetty? Is it a pier with wooden pillars? Is it, what's the access for the diver to get down? Are they handles, iron handles in the stone wall? Or is it a rope ladder? Or, I need to think about that more before I get too much further. And I thought that the wooden pillars would be nice because they'll provide more interest, because then I can have fish swimming in between the pillars, and they allow a transparent view through this. A big block like this sticking out is boring and it blocks the eye, and it's not very exciting. Plus, this is supposed to be in a very small fishing village, and so it's probably going to be wood construction. So that works. Now, here we go. Stuff gets a little wackier here. Ready? So at this point, after doing all that, I thought, okay, I've got to step back and think about these angles. And I struggled. I was, should the walker be, coming up? And what about, here's this dead space. What is this? This is dead space. Is the diver over here? Then what's going on there? That's not good. If I push this over and the diver's over here, this is awfully big for one diver to be in, right? So I kept kind of breaking it down until I got about here. One thing I was kind of reluctant to do was to have the walker going past the dock or the pier, because they're supposed to be watching what's going on in the pier. But then I was kind of running out of space, so still floundering, not quite thinking about it right. Decided to go with a wooden pier. If I put a boat over here, like a little rowboat, that would help balance this a little bit. And then I decided I needed to consider the Fibonacci ratio, or the golden rectangle. This is the concept that you have a single rectangle that is a part of a bigger rectangle that shares the same proportion as the smaller one. So the formula, it's actually missing something here really, is I think it's like that. So here's our regular rectangle. A over B, that ratio, is equal to A plus B over A, that ratio. Why am I doing this? Because I've realized that I need to think more about the size of the diorama at this point. I've been neglecting that entirely, and I think that's a mistake. And I think that I should be aiming for it to have a pleasing rectangular shape, if that makes sense. And I thought, well, why the hell not go with this kind of a concept? So then I started doing math and I started trying to figure it out. I will not bore you with all of the things I tried to do and learned. If you're interested, you can go online and look at it and see, and you can notice where actually some areas I made mistakes and I erased them. Putting this together took me a second. It took me an hour and a half. But I realized that I needed to declare some dimensions. So I thought, well, if I make this dimension 4, I can use that dimension to calculate all the other dimensions. And in doing that, and I picked that arbitrarily, that would give me a total rectangle dimension of, this would be from here to here. This is 10.5 inches to 6.5 inches. And that's not bad. I felt like that's a good size. Maybe a little small, maybe a little big. It's a little hard for me to tell, but it's going to be too small in a second. I'll show you why I expanded it. And then I started to look at the walker, and I started to try to do the same analysis for it. I have been considering modifying the walker heavily, cutting it in half and making it more narrow, or bringing up the front. I don't know because I don't have it with me yet, but I realized, well, what if I try to fix it to the Fibonacci golden rectangle? And after a lot of futzing, the answer was no, don't worry about it. Forget it. But it took me a few minutes to realize that the dimensions of the model listed include these legs, and that's why my original drawings looked way too out of proportion. So it's a little bit narrower than I originally conceived of. So this was where I ended up, and I'm feeling much better about where I am, but I still have quite a bit of work to do. Reanalyzing the walker's dimensions and thinking about that ratio, what I did is I just multiplied each of those dimensions by 1.2 to increase the total size but maintain the ratio. And that gave me a nice footprint for the action. It's a little tight, but remember I said I wanted to compress it. I'll know more once I get a lot of these elements together and I can lay them out and see how crushed it feels, because the height of this thing is going to be quite, what's the word I'm looking for? Quite difficult for me to get a feel of until I see it in person. And it's going to get modifications. I'm going to be adding all sorts of, boilers and pipe work and stuff to steampunk it up a bit more in the back. I'll have to know more down the road once I get it. But the way I'm thinking of it now is that I could bring this forward a little bit, pitch it just a little bit more so that their eyes are all looking here. The scientists are going to be looking this way, probably, because I don't think I'm going to have room on the dock to put everything. My diver in a much more contained watery area, and a rowboat/sailboat to help bridge this dead space in the water. And then underneath, if I want, I can put a deep one, something like that. The circles you see are the dimensions of the miniatures approximately by what I think is their personal space, So when miniatures sit on a base, it's a round disc. The disc is 30 millimeters or whatever it is. And that base is usually, there we go, old Warhammer miniature. But right, there's a lot of dead space on a miniature's base that he doesn't occupy. And in fact, if it's round, there's even more of that. But there's still a sort of diameter that the miniature does occupy by body, and I need to account for that. So after thinking about figuring out a little bit better about the dimensions for the walker, I realized that it's actually going to be a little crowded, and I thought it was going to be really hard to fill. I can push the tourists closer together because they're crowding to get a look, so that's an option. I have room for that, but you have to also recognize that they have space to walk around when they're not oohing and awing at some strange thing that they've noticed. I still need to do some work on this, and I actually need to think a little bit about this space and what I'm going to do with it. The walker is coming into this scene, so it's not like I can put a tree right behind him. How do you get there, right? So that's partly why I was going to tilt him, so I can have him coming in like this, and then I can put something here to help balance the height. And a sail on the boat will also help to bridge some of that visually going back. But at this point, I realize, where in this story does it scream that we're in Innsmouth? That's not clear. I was thinking about painting the side of the walker with Innsmouth tours or something, but that doesn't feel right for the scene I'm envisioning. I thought about putting a resident. So the Innsmouth people slowly change into fishmen, and so there's half changed people, and so I need a few of the residents here to convey that the town is Innsmouth. So I thought if I can put one here, hiding behind the bushes, right there's that privileged view. And I might look at some different cold ones. I keep wanting to say that. Deep ones to put under the water over here. And maybe something here, and maybe a resident just walking down the street, wearing a little bit of a hood, kind of covering most of them. I need that to bring this into the Lovecraftian Innsmouth world, and that's a major component I'm missing at the moment. So that is going to be a focus for the next time I sit down with this and think about it. And then I think I'll be ordering the miniatures shortly so that I can get them on hand, and then I can lay them out and start turning this into something a little bit more finished in terms of a layout. So hopefully you enjoyed looking at my almost premonition? Not really, but my plans for the project. This is going to be challenging, I think in a good way. Actually, I know it's in a good way, because I don't get to push myself in areas that I'd like to explore. So this is going to involve quite a bit of mini resculpting. All of the miniatures that I want to get are great as they are, but don't have the animation that's really important for the scene. And when I've looked at a lot of really high-end dioramas from military modelers, they've done a lot of restructuring on the miniatures to give them the pose that they want. So I'll be doing that, and I feel a lot more confident about that now, having done the Orc Idol. It taught me a lot, and it gave me a lot more confidence. So I'm going to be doing a lot of that, I suspect, and I'm going to be able to do deep underwater scenes. Deep. I haven't done any underwater imagery to date, and it's something I've really, really wanted to do for a long time. I'm so excited to be able to tackle that. And of course, you know me, I have visions of how I can add things to that technique that I have not seen other people do. And I don't know whether I'll be able to do it, and there's going to be a lot of research and a lot of experimentation, and I will take you all along on that journey. Another big let's do something different. But one thing, and I did mention it at the bench shot, but really needing to step back and think about how I'm going to convey that we are in Innsmouth, since it's so important to the motif, without putting a big sign on it that says, "Hi, welcome to Innsmouth," right? Like, how do we know we're there? And I've got some ideas on it. Ooh, I can use the boat. Ideas are popping into my head. But it's going to be I think the thematic challenge for the piece for me. And so I plan on re-listening to A Shadow Over Innsmouth, probably more than one more time. I was actually listening to it while I was doing some of that planning, and didn't hear it all because sometimes I concentrate. So probably will listen to that maybe 2 or 3 more times at least. But it's viewer comments. Tamsin P. Wargaming Girl wrote that she wondered when I was doing the unit bases for my Join Me at the Bench, and I was using Sculptamold to fill those. And she was saying maybe I should have considered acrylic caulking to fill the bases. I'm so glad that she asked this question, because I would not do that, mainly because acrylic caulking, it's the sweet in the drink, will take a long time to cure. When you make it that deep, it cures from the outside in, so it will seal itself off as it continues to dry, and the interior can take quite a long time to dry. However, another suggestion was made to me, can't remember exactly who, might have been Josh Foreman, to use something like Smooth On's Freeform Air Epoxy. So this is like an epoxy putty, very, very light. It's wonderful to work with. Dries really hard, but because it's an epoxy putty, it doesn't shrink. So it would eliminate all of those problems. It would go in a hell of a lot easier than the Sculptamold would. So it was like Dave Howard writes, and I'm just going to look on my notes here to help me through this. He speculated, paraphrasing a lot here, that viewers are interested in the modeling in my videos and not in the video style, pretty nonsense and stuff. And he was saying that, I should focus on being an artist and not being a production studio. And I thought that that's a good point to raise. Because I work too hard to try to make everything that I do the best that I can. And the video production I want to create is part of that. However, saying that, I know that it competes with my actual art time quite heavily, and it's maybe not necessary to showcase my work or teach you something about it or inspire you. But my goal is to kind of make this a little more visually interesting if I can, and I think some of the things that I do, like doing the 2 cameras or having the cocktail banner, or even including Dave's little comment down here, it takes time. I gotta go crop it and paint and bring it in and do all that. I mean, it takes time. It takes time. And I feel like it's worth it, and I enjoy doing it. And I'm sure there are some people out there, maybe many of you, who like your videos to have a little polish, if possible. I want to stick a little cocktail banner over it from time to time. I don't know. If you only want to see the art, then just skip right to that using the timestamps, and then just watch that 20 minutes and jump out. There isn't much fanciness going on in there. But thank you so much for making that comment, though, and I really appreciate the kinds of feedbacks I get in my comments. And before I read the last one, so many people have been so encouraging for me in sort of trying to re-envision what I'm doing and where I want to take it. And it's just, it's really nice. It's really nice. And to know that I have that kind of support and encouragement is really helpful. And so I just want to thank you all for that. All right, I needed to go get another set of notes because I forgot to write them down on my real notes here, and I won't remember it even if I had wrote them down, so I'm going to read them. So, Iskadel, Peter Francis, Acerta? God, I hope I have that right. My S doesn't look quite like an S. Acerta and the Unforgiven 188 all mentioned that they like the bell and that it's helpful for them, and they enjoy that when I put up an annotation. And I actually migrated that. And there were other people, actually, that commented on the bell as well. So thank you. And I'm moving to put them into these kinds of segments as well, because you're probably, you don't have to look at my pretty face the whole time. You might just be doing something and then you are going to miss an annotation. So I'm putting them in, keeping their volume low, and hopefully those continue to be helpful. So thank you so much for that. I appreciate that feedback as well. Lastly, I don't know, I might cut this out. I'm going long. Got a lot of survey responses, a lot more, super helpful. And it looks like most of what I'm doing is working for most people, which is cool. But I'm keeping I got to go back through and really look at that in a little more detail. So it's late, and I don't know if I'm going to get this up early morning Tuesday. I am trying very, very hard to get them out on Tuesdays. And actually today, I wrote down times for all of these things, thinking, how much time does it really take me to do this? And should I be starting this stuff on Sunday? So I'll keep working on it. I got a shot this time, but I don't know at the moment. Thank you for joining me once again. I really appreciate it. And I hope you are going to come back to see the progress on this project, because you know that I will be back soon with another Terranscapes video.